Section 1 is called Torah, right? Which means teachings in this case, right? And we begin with the sovereignty of God. I have to tell you that as I was reading this book, I thought to myself, its subtitle is The Philosophy of Jewish Laws and Observances. But in fact, I think it would have been better titled The Book of Answers. I'll tell you, each question that you have, Hirsch deals with as though it had come into your mind for the first time, and he's been considering this for a lifetime.
Wow.
It's like he's got it all down, right? He begins with the sovereignty of God, right? Because in order to understand everything that follows, you have to have a conclusion as to what is the role of God in your life. Okay? So his first quote comes from Exodus 20, verse 2, right? And it's very famous. It is the first statement that God makes to the Jewish people as a whole.
This is the first one.
This is the first sentence of the Ten Commandments.
Oh, wow.
I am the Lord thy God, who brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Right? This is how Rav Hirsch begins the issue of the sovereignty of God. Interestingly enough, it doesn't begin with the creation of the world. Right? It actually begins with an event of taking a nation out of another nation. And Hirsch begins. Life is lived should be the flower of knowledge. But in order that that life may blossom out of knowledge, knowledge alone is not enough. So we have to have in mind, once again, the environment in which Hirsch is writing. Hirsch is writing at a time of great intellectual development, of the growth of science, of the growth of the arts, of the growth of it's an explosion of knowledge, right? And knowledge itself becomes an idol for many people. So he's pointing out that knowledge is of great value. He begins by saying that, right? But then he says that knowledge alone is not enough. To the world in which he lived, most people felt knowledge alone is enough.
That was the real materialism.
It wasn't actually materialism. It wasn't actually materialism. It was a love of knowing, a love of learning. Yeah. You know, today, you know, we have a love of a Porsche. You know, we have a love of gold.
Yeah.
But in Hirsch's world, there was a great love of learning. The great universities, the Dark Ages were being pushed aside.
So it was just burgeoning,
you know,
and starting.
It was an explosion of knowledge, and knowledge was in itself of great value. And knowledge alone is not enough. The knowledge with which you have enriched your mind must be applied to yourself. This is so important, right? This is an essential part of Jewish learning. You must recognize what you know as appertaining to you. You must transfer it from mind to heart, which decides your course of action. It must penetrate you through and through, and it must become part of yourself. Then and only then will it become the basis of your activity. It will become your life. So what Hirsch is telling us here, and this is so key to all Jewish learning, is that Jewish learning changes you. It doesn't simply give you a better understanding of the stars, a better ability to build a bridge, right? Because it's founded on the will of God. It changes who you are, because you're acting in concert with the will of God. And you need to know that as you're learning it. The difference between what Rambam learned from Aristotle, right, and what the Greeks learned from Aristotle, was that Rambam was able to learn the godliness of it, in fact. And which meant that Aristotle had an element of that. And he was able to be an Aristotelian and at the same time be a wonderful Jew, you know, at the level that only Rambam could be at. We should always understand that when we learn something, and it'll be very easy to follow this when we're learning Horeb, that anything you learn, when you get up from the table of learning, it should change how you behave that day. Right? Nothing you learn in Torah is theoretical. Everything is, as he puts it, applied action appertaining to you. It is for you, and you have to remember that unlike, say, Harry Potter, yeah, Harry Potter is a very popular book, right? It's written for the masses, right? And it's very successful. Book, movie, whatever. The Torah is written for everybody, but more than that, it's written for everybody as an individual. It's as though, here's your Torah, Charles. Here's your Torah. Here's my Torah. It's all the same book. But since it's written by God and God's infinite wisdom, sometimes with a great teacher, right? Or a great preacher, people will say it as well. You're sitting in the shul, you're sitting in the class, and he's talking directly to you. He knows what's on your mind, what's bothering you, and he's answering your question on the spot. He said, how did you do that? Right? But it turns out, if you talk to the guy next to you, who has a whole different set of issues, right? The guy's thinking the same thing. How did he know that? Right? And the woman over there, how did he know that was my issue? Right? This is a sign of a great teacher. Kal v'chomer, how much more so when the great teacher is God himself. Right? He can fit everything perfectly. Right? So that when you get up from learning a sefer, when you get up from reading the Torah, when you get up from davening, right, it changes you. Right? It applies to you. It's not intended to be information. It's intended to change you.
Wow.
In this world, not just in the next world, but in this world. So also it is with the highest concept of God. So it's easy when you're dealing with something, when the Gemara says, or Halacha says, when you get up in the morning, wash your hands. Or even more so, I'll give a better example. Water that's left out overnight, right, open, you shouldn't drink. Because we say there could have tumah, there could have impurities in it, right? Originally it began because the snake could leave his venom in water. He might have gone in the water and left some venom behind and left. You drink it, you can be poisoned, right? So it's easy for us to say, okay, I'm going to cover the water jar. I understand that rule now. I'm covering the water jar. Right? Take care of it, right? But how about with God? Our God impacts everything that happens in our world and is completely abstract. Remember we talked about this idea of the baby who doesn't really know the mother. The mother knows the baby, right? God is something that we don't see in this world. We just see the result of God in this world. So he's saying even that has to be applied in your life. So also with the highest concepts of all, God. Your idea of God may be something more than the mere result of a chain of reasoning pursued in total abstraction from the outside world. You can figure out God exists because the universe doesn't work without it. Or you could have had an intimate moment with God. And he gives a number of examples. You may have beheld God directly in nature, a sunset, a mountain, a valley, or perceived him in history. How can the Jews continue to exist? There's no logic to it, right? It must be a miracle. A holy writ may have spoken to you as it did to generations before you in its God-revealing narratives. You have this very famous thing that changed your life.
That's right,
It's Shens.
I just thought of the exact same thing.
That's right.
Yeah.
But you may have grasped all this only with your mind, which is how you did. Remember the story of Shens, right? The first moment of your learning of that was, I could never have thought of that. If I lived in the world, I could never have thought of that. Only God could have that idea. Right? So now you have an understanding God is very smart. Right? He knows a lot of stuff.
Yeah, he knows a lot of stuff, yeah.
He knows a lot of stuff, right? That's not God. Right? But that's a moment of insight that God gave you specifically. Tishen's was put in the Torah for you, for Charles. God wrote it for you. Right? That you would see it and it would change your life. Right? But it only began to change your life. It gave you that brilliant moment of saying, I'm onto something here. You know, I'm onto something here. And I'm going to pursue it doggedly. I'm not going to let it go. Right? And when somebody does that with Torah, the benefits are immense, as you've seen in your own life.
Oh, yeah.
So it says, a holy writ may have spoken to you as it did to generations before you, and it's God revealing the hours. But you may have grasped all this only with your mind and stored it in your memory. This is not enough. So long as you do not receive God into your heart as your God, not just simply as God, but as your God, and embrace Him with your whole being as your God, so long as this concept is a mere denizen of your brain, so long as this sovereign idea will be without influence on your actual life. Right? So it's a very dangerous thing. This is an academic's view of Torah. Okay, so I'm not saying that it's all nature. There probably is a God in this world. Right?
Still an intellectual exercise.
Exactly, right? And as long as it's that, you're missing the point. You're dangerously missing the point. Now, what he's going to point out as we go forward is that these issues, and it's why he begins a thing with the Ten Commandments, unlike Bereshis, right? Is he's going to explain the difference as we go forward between mankind and Jews.
Oh, wow.
Right? And what the significance of it is. And we'll see as we go forward. Right? You may again recognize the world as the temple of God's omnipotence, without, however, feeling that every spot on which you tread in this temple is hallowed to God. You may recognize in the multitude of created beings a great concourse of servants of God, without, however, regarding the feeling that you yourself are also a creature and an Eved of Hashem, a servant of God. So this is Rabbi likes to point out that when people say the word Echad in Shema, one, that they hold on to the D, the Dalet. And there's a few reasons why they do, and while they're holding on to it, they're thinking this is the God of the seven heavens, the God of the four directions, all of those things, right? And you have a sense of the universe that this is a God of the above and the below, all sides, all. And Rabbi likes to say, while you're going through that whole process, remember that He's not just the God of Tanzania. He's actually your God, personally.
Yeah.
It's not that He's just the God of everywhere. He's your God, specifically, right? He is the God who has created you and created for you, right? Wow. Everything He's done is to make this work for you, right? And your relationship with Him is different than my relationship with Him, right? Different than Rabbi Breivitz's relationship with Him, because that's the nature of the infinite, right? But it is very personal.
Wow. You may have recognized.
Right. So that you have to recognize that you are yourself an Eved of Hashem. And you may have recognized the lofty vocation of Israel as God's instrument in history for the education of the human race, without feeling yourself to be every fiber a son or daughter of Israel, right? Ben or Bas Yisrael. So it's easy for us to look back at history and say, look at the mistake of history. Israel continues to exist. The Pascal, right, when asked by King Louis, prove to me that God exists. Pascal said, Your Highness,
the Jews,
the Juif,
the Jews. Yeah, that's right.
He didn't have to say any more, right? Why? Because the existence of the Jews through history in itself, right, is proof. Right? So he says, remember, this is not about the existence of the history of the Jewish people, which is glorious and troubled and painful and uplifting and all of those things. Right? You are part of the history of the Jews. You can't look at the history of the Jews because you're in it. You're part of it, right? And if you become a student of the history, right, you become the Rasha in the Haggadah. You become the son who says, what does this mean to you? Right? To you, as if he's not part of it. Right? So he recognizes the whole history of the Jewish people. Right? He just doesn't feel like he's part of it. Right? So Rav Hirsch is telling us, don't make this mistake. Know that you are an element of the history of the Jews yourself. Right? And this will change you. Right? So long as this is so, your knowledge is barren, and the flower of actual life does not spring from it. It's like a tree that doesn't have fruit coming. It is for this reason that Israel's life history opens with the words, I, the Lord who brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, I am thy God. He doesn't say, I am God. It would have been enough. He's saying, Charles, I'm thy God. David, I'm thy God. Right? He's saying individually, right? At this moment, right?
Oh.
It's very important, right? It wasn't necessary. It didn't have to be, I'm your God. It could have been, I'm God. Now he's going to analyze the statement. I, a personality standing independently outside and above the universe, I am the Lord, who in my love called the universe into being, and with my love sustained the host of living creatures, and with my love destined the human race above all others for a full and free unfolding of its powers, and guide its generations in a steady progress, linking past, present, and future. For this loving education of the human race, I brought thee out of the land of Egypt. I brought you out of the land of Egypt. Intervened in the process of world history, revealed myself to you above all others as an omnipotent creator, governor, sustainer, ruler of nature, and as a creator, governor, judge, and educator of men and nations, whereof you must not give the lie to your people's history, even if all the world should deny me. And who brought you out of the house of bondage and became your creator a second time, so that while every man as my creature is called upon my servant, you have a double duty, to devote yourself with all your powers as an instrument of my service, as an Eved of Hashem. So he's saying, make no mistake, I created everybody, everything, right? But I had a second interaction with you, with the Jewish people. Right? With the Jewish people, I created their nation. I drew them out of bondage, right? And I made them a bondage, by the way, that I put them into.
Yeah.
So they should recognize that, right? I reached in as I did nowhere else. And you can look at the whole history of mankind, right? You know, there is no history where a nation was in another nation and was pulled out of that nation to receive its constitution and start its life. There are nations that took over other nations, civil wars, whatever, but nothing like this, right? To the miracles. So he's saying, I did that for a reason. Right? I didn't have to do it that way. I did it for a reason. He's going to go on to explain it. So I, the Lord, am your God. I am your creator, your lawgiver, your judge, the director of your thoughts, your feelings, your words, your actions. Every one of your internal and external possessions has come to you from my hand. Every breath of your life has been apportioned to you by me. Look upon yourself and all that is yours as my property. Right? There's a miracle of life that exists. You know, we see it at the birth of a child. We see it as life goes on. You know, how does this whole thing function? You know, in the morning we say Asher Yitzhar, right? Thank you, Hashem, that there are no blockages.
Yeah, I say that every morning.
Offices.
That's right. Yeah.
The human being is this incredibly complex organism that the greatest physicians and scientists are guessing at how it works. You know. Today, people call medicine a science. They didn't used to. Medicine was called an art for hundreds and hundreds of years. Only recently is it called a science. It is an art. Right? And it is not a science. Every time I add 4 plus 4, I'm getting 8. Right? But we all know people who are misdiagnosed. We all know people who are given medication that's not effective or that has wrong side effects. Is the doctor doing that to be harmful? Exactly the opposite. No doctor wants to hurt his patient. Right? But his knowledge is limited, and every human being is a little different than the next. And so our body of knowledge, of medical knowledge, is, I'm going to take my best shot. That's what it really is, and we know it. You know, that's why we get second opinions. That's why we pray a lot when we go to the right? But it is that. So he's saying you should know that when you look around you and when you look inside of yourself and when you think about how you function, how your son functions, how people around you function, you should understand all of those things can only happen as a result of a being like myself. Nothing else can create that. You can't juggle that in an evolutionary way. This is intelligent design. It's not intelligent design. It's absolutely stunningly brilliant, elegant design. Not just intelligent.
Not just intelligent, yeah.
No.
And devote yourself.
What?
Where you are, and devote yourself. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines down from number 4. Look upon yourself.
Look upon yourself. Okay. Look upon yourself and all that is yours as my property, and devote yourself wholly to me, with every fraction of your property, every moment of your time, with mind, feeling, bodily strength and means, with word and action. Be the instrument and the agent of my will, with all that has accrued or will accrue to you, and so join freely in the choir of creation as my creature and my servant, and as a man and an Israelite, as a mensch Yisrael. He's saying you've had a double experience. You're part of the initial creation. You're part of Yetziras Mitzrayim. You have a reason to understand your unique position in the universe. Here is the threshold of Jewish life, the condition and the basis of all that follows. Come then, young man and young woman of Israel. If all that I have hitherto written has not been written in vain, if the spirit of the Torah has spoken to the ear of your own spirit, and you have learned to behold God in the world, in humanity and in Israel, if you have learnt the true worth of humanity and of Israel, and your heart swells at the thought that you yourself bear the name of human being and Yisrael, then advance here to the threshold of Yisrael's life temple, and dedicate yourself to live as men and Israelites. Yisrael. Come forward and accept God, give yourselves to your God, and dedicate yourselves to Him and His servants, with all that is yours, at every moment and with every breath of your lives, servants of His will, men and Israelites. It's very interesting that this week, we're reading the Alter Rebbe and others have said that you should live with the Parsha. And this week we're really reading a parsha of two men. Right? One man is Avraham, and one man is his servant, Eliezer. Avraham finds a resting place for Sarah, the family burial plot, and Eliezer is charged with the continuity of the Jewish people, finding a wife for Yitzchak. Eliezer isn't Jewish.
He's not Jewish, Eliezer?
He's a follower of Abraham. He is certainly a monotheist and a Talmud Chacham. You could say he's the first convert, if you wanted to, right? But he's not by blood, for sure not Jewish.
They found him or somewhere. He just showed up. Where did he come from?
It's so interesting. The important thing about Eliezer, right, is Eliezer comes from the line of Ham and Canaan. So Eliezer had to be a servant. This was that.
Ham, that's Noah's other sons, right?
That's right.
Oh, the ones we're from the Shem, so
that's right.
Yeah, the other sons, the ones that did the wrong thing.
So they were cursed that they had to serve.
Yeah, they had to serve. That's
so
right.
Eliezer understood in life, I have to serve.
Oh.
Right. So what did he do? He said, I'm going to serve Abraham. Right? I'm going to serve Abraham. Right? I'm not going to serve the king of barbarians. I'm going to serve Abraham. Right? If I am going to choose to serve, I'll serve Abraham. If I'm going to choose to lead, maybe I won't. No, I don't have this choice. My family are people who serve. Right? So I should choose the right target of that service. Right? And he chose very wisely.
Yeah, he did. He chose very
wisely. We should do the same.
Did he find him? How did he come about? He just
Abraham was a famous man.
So he went to him.
Yeah, I don't really know the medrash on this, but
imagine that's probably what something happened.
But we should do the same. We should choose wisely.
Choose wisely.
Hirsch is saying we have every reason to make the right choice. Right? We'll have the benefits that Eliezer had serving Abraham, and much more so to serve Abraham's boss.
Could the way this is written and the way he's talking about how beautiful this is, could it be a little bit, though, we're like you said, we had the second creation or the second situation. This is a lot of the basis. Jews have such a special relationship with God that a little bit the other nations would be jealous of. Or cause maybe lead to the anti-Semitism.
The whole question of anti-Semitism we'll deal with further on. It's a very complex issue, and I don't really think it's jealousy in that sense, because in the world that God, first of all, in the world that God created, His intention was that all mankind would have this relationship with Him. As we know, it didn't work out in the generation of the flood. God tried again. It didn't work out in the generation of the Migdal Bavel, the tower, right? And so God set out to find an individual that would father a nation whose responsibility would be to bring the light of God to the world. That would be the job. Now we had very mixed results in doing it. Right? You know, you can look at our two kind of sister religions, or maybe nephew religions, Christianity and Islam. Clearly, they take their sustenance from us. Would that make them hostile to us? I think it would only make them hostile to us if we don't do our job right. If we did our job right, I don't think it would make them hostile to us. And I think more often than not, there's a deep-seated anger that we're not doing our job right. If you really are this conduit of flow of Shefa from heaven, and you're not keeping the tubes clean, the channel perfect, right? I'm at the other end of that tube. I'm getting rust. I'm getting gook. The water is coming through very slowly, right? That's because you messed up. Right? I'm not saying this is a consciousness, but in a messianic world where Jews live as they are intended, as God intended them to live, right, these problems don't exist. It says that 10 will grab onto the coattail of a Jew because they want to have the benefit of it. Look, it's not as though we're saying service is a bad thing. We believe in serving God. Right? This is our responsibility. We're trying to demonstrate it to the world. Right? If we don't demonstrate it properly, the world is saying, you're some example. Right? It's pretty disheartening. Who else is left? We got it from you. It's why you roll. So now we're going to actually learn more about exactly this issue, the uniqueness of Israel. And he begins with the Shema.
Okay.
Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Know this day and lay it to your heart that the Lord, He is God in heaven above and upon the earth beneath, and there is none else. This is from Deuteronomy 4, chapter 39, and the first, of course, is the first line of Shema.
It's Deuteronomy 6.
So, no, 4.
The
first one, Shema, is
the Shema. Thank you for correcting me. The first one, Hear, O Israel, Lord our God, is Deuteronomy 4, and the lower one is Deuteronomy 4:39.
Correct.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah. So this is before then. The Know This Day came earlier in Deuteronomy than
that's
Hear,
right.
Oh, okay.
That's right.
Oh, cool.
That's right.
Okay.
So he's giving us two pieces, right? Both of them are telling you have an awareness.
Have an awareness. Right? Okay. Cool.
Learn the lesson, Israel, from your national experience. Learn it from the word of your God. Understand it and take it to heart. The God whom you have acknowledged as your God is one and only one. This chapter is called The Unity of God. And Rav Hirsch here is going to make clear to us that although we live in a world of tremendous diversity, the source of that diversity is very clear and very straight. It's not something that there's a duality to it. There's only one, and it's unique. The world presents to you a scene of great variety. You see in it creation, order, sustenance, here a call to existence, there a recall from existence, a seed growing, a blossom and a fruit, fruit falling into decay and dust, dust and decay changing into new seed, here bare stone, there plants growing lustily, animals let loose to fend for themselves, and man released from the iron law of compulsion and given the freedom of choice. You see unchangeable law ruling the celestial realms, while in the earth seems to be in perpetual change. This is very chaotic and very confusing. Is it eternal, or is it constantly changing? Human history, too, is full of change and variety. You see men created, taught, corrected, trained, then left to themselves as if without supervision. Then the coming of revelation, and one people among all the peoples created, brought up, instructed, guided. You see war and peace, abundance and scarcity, life and death assigned to the peoples. Nations set upon the path of history, and the gates of the setting sun open to them. So, he's saying, when you look around you, you don't see consistency. You see constant change. Constant change. Yeah? And change can be very disturbing.
Ancient Chinese curse, they live in interesting times.
Exactly. Exactly, that's right. So it can be a very disturbing thing. On the other hand, think once more, where he is. He's in a world where change is being glorified. It's a great thing, right?
For knowledge,
that everything they see is changing.
Yeah, new understanding of science,
steam engine, all this
steam engine, everything. Yeah.
So you're seeing all these things, and your own life too is full of change and variety. You are aware of power which is placed you here, of an eye which watches over you, of a voice which gives you a law and guides you, of a hand which trains and disciplines you. You see a continual living and taking away of body and mind, of life and death, of health and sickness, strength and weakness, suffering and joy. You know yourself to be a dual creature, with body and mind, called upon to receive and to give, to suffer and to do. It seems like a very difficult situation.
There's a lot of things going on.
But, however great the variety presented to you by both nature and by history and by your own life, you have nonetheless grasped the fact, which one must now lay to the heart as vital, that all this is the doing of one God, through whose will everything, everywhere, has been and is, and whose will has directed everything that has happened and will happen to you. So this is
that's a heavy.
It's a comfort and it's a heavy.
Yeah, but he's suggesting will happen to you. So is it saying that predestiny, everything is predesigned that what's going to happen to you?
Well, it's the famous paradox.
Yeah.
Right?
How do we have free will then?
Exactly. Can we change the future? Yes, we can. Does God know the future? Yes, He does. If He knows it, how can we change it? And if we change it, how can He know it? Right? Do I really have free will? So there are a lot of different explanations for this. One of them is we're confusing God with just a very smart guy.
Yeah.
Or woman. Right? That, God is smarter than the greatest supercomputer. It's a silly thing. The greatest supercomputer exists because God exists. Right? Silicon chips exist because God exists. What does it mean? God is not smarter than the greatest supercomputer. God is in a different ballpark. So could God know and adjust every scenario to our free will, so that I had an uncle, my Uncle Al. He was a wonderful man, my father's older brother. And Uncle Al used to come over, especially Pesach, and he would play this game with us, where he would give us an arithmetical problem.
I beg your pardon?
Arithmetical problem. We were like 12 years old, and he would begin by saying, 2 plus 2 divided by 3 plus 6 divided by 4 plus 3. And you had to, you were calculating.
In your head, right? Yeah, okay.
And it was so hard to do. Right? By the time you're 16, right, my older brothers knew. I didn't know because I was 12. But my older brothers knew the answer is always 3. It's always 3. He had a system. In which it had to come out to be 3. Right? But if you tried to follow it, you would never come out with 3. So, did we have free will to calculate that number and to come out with what the right number was? Yes, we did. Was it predestined to always be 3? Yes, it was. No matter what we did, it was going to come out to be 3. Right? Uncle Al was not God, so it only worked as a parlor trick. Right? But God, with this infinite knowledge, right, can know what the future is, even though we can change it. This is a painful thing for the mind of man. It's called a paradox, right? And it is one of the very proofs of our own limitations, that we can somehow not grasp these two opposing ideas, free will and predestination, right? But we should take comfort in it that separates us from God, and we don't have to understand it completely. There's some things that you don't have to understand. This is one that you can make up a lot of scenarios for.
Yeah,
it may not be satisfying. But he's saying that God does have
ability,
predestination. One God everywhere and in everything. Everything comes from this God, both in heaven and earth, and everything therefore confirms one design, in part of the all-wise plan. I actually can, in a way, answer it if we go back to this metaphor we talked about before about the baby. So, regardless, really, of the choices that the baby makes, right, the baby will emerge at a certain point from the mother and will eat food. Okay, he doesn't want to now, right? So he doesn't, right? Or he's anxious to, and he comes early, right? But the process is going to be that he's going to come out, right? He's not going to stay there forever. come out. It has to happen, right? There's a process that goes on. So he can do the things that he wants to do within the universe. But part of the point, the elegant point, and I never actually thought about this before, but now that I heard you saying it, it becomes easier to understand. One God everywhere and everything. Everything comes from this one God, both in heaven and on earth. Everything therefore conforms to one design. It's part of one all-wise plan. Right? So, if everything is within God, and God is within everything, that even when we exercise our free will, we're exercising it within that frame.
Yeah, that's right, inside the framework.
So we shouldn't be surprised that God can anticipate the future, right? Because we're in Him, we're in His womb, in a sense. But above all, the most vital lessons to lay to heart is that this one God is your God, and you have acknowledged Him in order to live rightly, just as the world, with all its variety, history, and all its change, has its origin in one source. So, in the previous paragraphs, we've been talking about duality. Now we're going to find out that there is no duality, it's an illusion. It comes from one source, is guided by one hand, serves one being, strives upwards toward this one.
Mm-hmm.
So must you recognize and feel your life, with all its changes, to issue from one source, to be guided by one hand, to flow towards one goal. You must comprehend your life with all its diversity as proceeding from this one, and you must direct it towards this one, in order that your life may be a unity, just as your God is one. So there's a way to make life work. He's giving us the secret of it. The secret of it is, you're part of this. Don't try and back out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Aim for it. Demand from it. Be part of it. Learn what it wants. Right? Understand God's universe and function within it. And if you function within it, all the pieces come into play for you at that point. With mind and body, with thought and feeling, with word and deed, with enjoyment, in wealth and in poverty, in joy and in sorrow, in health and sickness, in freedom and slavery, in life and death, your life task is everywhere always the same. For it all proceeds from one God, and has been assigned by the one God as your task in life. Therefore, everything is of equal significance. For in everything, with everything, you have been summoned to the service of one God. Strive to reach this one, and be one in you. Strive to reach this one, and be one in your heart, as your God is one. So, Hirsch is not saying here that when you're one with God, only good things happen. He's not saying that. He's saying there is sickness, there is poverty, there is pain. Right? But if you can acknowledge the source of those things, it comes from the source of joy, from health, from wealth, right? Then suddenly these things are of equal import in your life. That you can understand the pain that I have at this moment is part of a test, but in the end it's for my good. Do I understand why it's for my good that my knee hurts? I don't understand.
No.
I don't understand. But maybe someday I will. And I know that since it's a God that gave me all that He's given me, that created a universe for me, a world for me, a home for me, a family for me, you know, the odds are that whatever it is for my benefit. It's clearly not a vindictive God. Right? So, and it is a God tailored for me. Right? God has said, I am your personal God. I am, by the way, everybody's personal God. But you don't have to be concerned with, my God. You have to be concerned with your own God. Right? And that God will speak to you, because that God has an interest in your welfare.